Coming up on tonight's episode of Faith versus Culture, our conversation with actor, director, producer Kevin Sorbo. That's next.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. My name is Dan Andros, managing editor of CBN's Faithwire.com, joined as always by Billy Hallowell. Billy, what's going on?
Well, I'm doing well. I'm excited because we have our guest here today, Kevin Sorbo, who has done a million projects, but I'm super excited because we're going to be talking about his new film, Left Behind. Kevin, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. So I'm looking at both you guys. I realize I got to grow a beard and a mustache now to be on your show. You guys,
you got to match us.
You guys do some very good facial hair there. Mine's not that fantastic, but I make it scruffy enough when I do Westerns.
No, that's great. See, I have to make up for the loss on the top, and then so I just, this is my route.
It looks good.
Oh, I
love it.
Well, listen, Kevin, you are playing Rayford Steele, and I mean, obviously, everybody watching knows Left Behind, the book series, the film franchise. You direct this film. What was it that made you want to dive into this?
Well, I mean, as growing up as well, I read the books way back when, and the Left Behind guys, all the books rights are owned by Paul Alon and his company there, Cloud 10. When they came out with the last movie back in 2014 with Nicolas Cage playing the same role that I'm playing now, they got inundated with emails from people because God's Not Dead came out at the same time. And they said, why isn't Kevin Sorbo playing the part of Rayford Steele? So they called me up and they flew out to LA when I was still living there. I live in Florida now, of course, thank goodness for that. And, they said, hey, we want to do the next one with you. And it took a long time for everything, all the pieces of the puzzle to get put together from their end and from my end. And so finally, about 2 years ago, they said, we're ready to go. And we shot it just a little over a year ago. And I'm excited. I mean, I love it. I started directing back in the Hercules years, so I love directing as well. And they gave me the captainship for that. Paul just told me the other day they love what they're seeing on the movie right now. So they're writing the next one. We'll probably be filming the next one by the end of this year. So it's very exciting.
Wow. Why do you think, Kevin? Why do you think that there's so much intrigue with eschatology and sort of end time storylines?
Well, because I think it looks like the world's coming to that right now. I mean, everything we're seeing in this angry world that we're living in, that filled with so much hate and divisiveness, it just feels like, it's interesting when you read the Bible, look at the Bible, it is sort of predicted all these things that are happening down the road right now. I mean, maybe 1,000 years from now, as the Bible says, it's going to come like a thief in the night. So we don't know. But the reality is, I think this is a perfect timing for this movie with what we see going on, not only in America, but around the world. So, I do a lot of speaking events. Mostly I don't talk on Christian education. The bulk of them is pro-life. And every time I've been speaking over the last year and a half now, I tell people, hey, we got the next Left Behind movie coming out. People go crazy for it. I speak in front of 500 to 3,000 people, depending on the crowd. They love it and they're excited for this, but we got to get the word out. And I appreciate you guys having me on because, we don't have the Avatar advertising budget that James Cameron does. He has $100 million to throw around on his $300 million movies. We need word of mouth. And that's what happened with movies like Let There Be Light and with Soul Surfer and God's Not Dead. We need people out there that want, that fill up these seats. Otherwise, like I know, the guys that own theaters don't care what movie's in there. They want to sell popcorn and sodas. So we got to fill the seats up to make sure this movie stays in there longer than just the 1 week.
Yeah, and it hits theaters January 26th. It's a Fathom event. But I have to ask you, because there were 3 initial movies years ago with Kirk Cameron. Then there was the 2014 film that you referenced. And now there's this one. And this is, again, it's Left Behind, Rise of the Antichrist. So we get an idea there of what this is going to be about. But how does this film differ in terms of the tone and the tenor from the past movies in the franchise?
I think ultimately because the technology and everything else, it's going to look better. I mean, the cameras today, the pricing of shooting, you can have a $3 million movie or $300 million movie without the special effects. And they look great, and we got a great production team on this. I've worked with them before. up in Canada, and it's darker. Obviously, it's 6 months after the rapture has happened. It's leaving, all the Antifa members and everybody else are still on Earth and trying to figure out what's going on and what happened. And you got to, you're obviously going to deal with people with denial. You're going to deal with people saying, oh my gosh, this just seems like a sci-fi movie to me. And then you got people like my character, which grew up in a family that, the wife was a Christian, my son was a Christian, my daughter wasn't. I love the fact they keep the college daughter still here because we see what's going on college campuses. So it's partly, there's a number of stories in there, but Rayford's journey really now is saying it's 6 months later feeling sorry for himself. Now he says, I got to do something about this. I got to find out what's going on because I was wrong. And not only does he go through all his wife's stuff and her diary and whatever else to kind of find, and her Bible to see what was marked in it, he finally goes to the church that she always went to. And he knows where the church is because he was that typical CEO Christian. He never had to believe, but he did show up on Christmas and Easter, of course. But, it's fascinating when he goes there, and who does he find still there but the pastor himself? And I think that speaks to a lot what's going on in our churches today. I think there's a lot of woke pastors out there and a lot of churches that don't even want to work together anymore. And I think that's a big problem in America and why churches have changed so much, because people are afraid to lose their flock. My pastor is still my pastor, Rob McCoy from Thousand Oaks, California. I was in that church 10 years. We still watch him live here in the feed here in Florida, because one of the first things he said when I met him, he said, I'm not afraid to work in my congregation down to a manageable size. I love that. I love that quote. And I love the fact that he speaks the truth. And what has happened in his church, it's only gotten bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great perspective to have because, you look at the prophets in the Old Testament and they weren't out there trying to get popularity. In fact, they were often preaching a very unpleasant message to the people at the time that was going to bring them pain. I mean, look at Jeremiah.
Sure.
So it's much better to cling to the truth and have an audience of one with God on that. But I wanted to just ask you, we're talking eschatology, end times with the theme of this movie. Mm-hmm. And I like that stories like that because I think we can lose our eternal perspective when we're here in the busyness of life. Billy and I were just talking before the show here about, the Buffalo Bills player and the tragedy that he's going through, but everyone just suddenly is jolted into realizing their mortality. Do you get the sense that your movie helps kind of people consider their mortality, consider what's going to happen when this life is over here?
Well, I think the number one weapon of government, not only ours, but a lot around the world, is fear. They love using fear as a weapon. We saw it during COVID. Yeah. We're still seeing it now, and they use it to control people's lives. So people are filled with fear. People are worried. They're concerned. They're insecure. And I think a good place to find a way to battle that fear is not only through the Bible, but going to movies like the ones I do, the one the Kendrick brothers do, the one the Irwin brothers do. I think people... it's interesting. People are afraid to ask people to go to the church. Hey, come to my church. And I know there's a bunch of church people there. I don't want to go. But ask to come to movies is a different thing. And I get people come up to me at hotels, airports, whatever it may be, and saying, hey, look, I don't believe the way you do. I'm agnostic maybe. It's like I got questions about it. But I went to see this movie because a friend asked me to go. And I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it had a good message. And that's what this movie is going to do. And I hope, if anything, this movie makes people go back home and open up the book of Revelation. As my old pastor growing up used to say, read the book of Revelation, it'll scare the hell out of you. So I'm hoping that people will take a look at it and really, because if you read that, the first time I read it as a 12-year-old kid, it did scare me. It freaked me out. And now as I got older, I looked at it and I go, what kind of acid trip was he on when he wrote the book of Revelation? Because it is unbelievable what your mind, visual effects today can't even come close to what your mind explodes in when you read that book. So I'm hoping that people, it makes them think about it more, because there is end of time, you call it a faith-based movie, but every movie is faith-based. And I think I've said this to you before, Billy, that if you're an atheist, that's an incredibly strong faith to believe in nothing. And it's sad, too, because they live in a world with no hope. They live in a world with there's no, hope I can find a meaning in this life because that's it. And that's kind of a sad way to look at it. My atheist friends, I say, well, if I'm wrong, I've got nothing to lose, right? But if I'm right, see you later, So it's an interesting dive back into these books, because my tie goes back to with Dallas Jenkins, who's now doing amazing work with The Chosen. Dallas and I did a movie called What If together back in 2010. It's the same writers that did God's Not Dead. And my book, What If, is a much better movie. But once again, how do you get these independent movies out there if you don't have the power behind it to get it out there? So my tie-in there, and with Jerry Jenkins, who actually funded that movie, I've met with Tim LaHaye and talked with him, and phone calls before he passed away. So I love the fact that, look, for me, it's kind of a full circle thing with Dallas and his father and being part of the Left Behind franchise now, because it's an honor for me to be part of this.
All right, we are here with Kevin Sorbo talking Left Behind. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with more after this. This is Faith versus Culture on the CBN News Channel. Back in a second. All right, welcome back to Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there. We're joined today by Kevin Sorbo.
All right, Kevin, I want to talk about your faith a little bit, because you mentioned when you first read Revelation, you were 12, you were young. What was your faith journey? How did you become a Christian?
I've been a Christian all my life, and people go, how can you be a Christian? I grew up that way. I grew up in a very strong Lutheran family, typical Scandinavian, Norwegian kid, growing up in Minnesota. My parents, strong believers. I had, in my teenage years, we had a youth pastor. The pastor I grew up with was a pretty stiff and boring pastor, Pastor Sanders. But Pastor Lee was awesome. He was the youth pastor. We had a thing called The Room on Wednesday nights. So after basketball practice, football, whatever, Wednesday nights, you go to The Room. It was this double classroom. They had bean bags and couches and stuff. We'd hang out, and we would talk the Bible with him. That was kind of huge for me. And when I was 13, I think I may have told you this, can't remember, I went to see the Reverend Billy Graham speak. And there was 250,000 people at the St. Paul Fairgrounds. It was unbelievable. Hot August night. It was just, it was so moving for me. I remember it very vividly. And I remember, because I did something I normally wouldn't do. I mean, I was a good student, A and B student, but I was never the guy to raise my hand. If he called on me, hopefully I was ready to answer. But I won't, pick me. I never did that. But I stood up when the pastor said, when Billy Graham said, hey, come in front. We have a lot of volunteers to talk, speak, pray, whatever. And I got up and went down there. I cut through this big crowd of people, and I sat down with this guy who was probably 30. He's like a really old guy, because I was 13, and all of a sudden a hand went on my head, and I turned around, and it was the Reverend Graham. And his head was right behind the moon. It was a full moon. It was like, oh, there's lights coming out of his head. It was like this aura. And we had a little chat. He said a quick little prayer for me. It always stuck with me. I told that story on the Larry King show. And I got a call about 2 months later from Larry Ross, who was running you probably know Larry.
Yep.
And he said, hey, we saw the story that you told on Larry King. And we would love you to tell that story in Chicken Soup for the Soul, 101 Stories. That you'd be one of the guys that touched by Billy Graham. And I did it. And it was the only hardcover book they've ever done on Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I got called when the book came out by Larry again and said, hey, he's in his 90s. He can't get around too well. He wanted you to, if you wouldn't mind going around doing publicity and all the radio and talk shows. And I was like going, yeah. So it's just such an honor to be part of that. And that was back, I don't know how long ago that was. Now it's got to be 15, 16 years ago.
Wow. Incredible story there.
That was pretty cool.
And now you're in Hollywood, and I'd love to get a little window from your perspective into because we hear a lot about, and of course we see that Hollywood's largely leftist, largely not exactly welcoming in a lot of ways to Christian viewpoints. So what's been your experience like behind the scenes, sort of dealing with people? I mean, is it wrong? Is it a wrong thing are people generally pretty cool, or how is it from your perspective?
Well, I was in Hollywood. I left 4 years ago. I got out of Dodge. I live in Florida now. I left the worst governor for the best governor in the country. So anyway, I started getting more vocal about 11, 12 years ago, and just on the internet and things. And I started questioning people saying things on the set. They'd be very loud and vocal about slamming this or slamming that, anything to do with conservatives, anything to do with Christians. And I have found it's probably worse being a Christian in Hollywood than being a conservative. But since I'm both, I'm like a double leper in there. And my agent manager actually back in 2012 said, we can't work with you anymore. And they gave me my walking papers. And I went, wow. I said, you guys are the ones that, since I've been in the industry back in the 80s, you're the ones screaming for, freedom of speech and tolerance. But as we know, that's all a one-way street with them. And that's too bad to me, because I don't harbor that anger and hatred towards people who have a different point of view. But you see what's coming out of Hollywood in the last 10, 15 years. You see the movies, the agendas that they push. And anything to do, if you ever have a conservative in a movie or TV show, they're the idiots. Even on sitcoms, the dad's always kind of a bozo, and the mom's the one that's hot and she knows better. And they teach teenage kids today to talk down to their fathers, and they're doing that through the TV and movies that they do. And I just said, you know what? There was a quote from Walt Disney back in the 50s. It said, movies and television will influence our youth. Well, that's over 60 years ago. I think there's a lot of influencing going on right now. And it's gone down and so through the education system and everything. So I said, I want to go do movies that Hollywood used to do. Movies that have hope and love and laughter, and the good guy wins, not the bad guy. You know, Hollywood seems to glorify evil, glorify, bad behavior. And I don't mind if you do that in a comical way, but they do it in a reality way, and people buy into that. And this whole attitude thing now. But I've been very blessed to keep on working, even though they booted me out, because I got a strong base within the industry. I know enough people in it. And I've been very fortunate with Sorbo Studios that people reach out to me, and I'm working very hard trying to fund my own projects. I say not my own, but people that have brought scripts to me to say, you're the guy that we want you to do this movie. So my biggest battle every day is trying to raise $3 million to do a movie. And people say, $3 million's a lot. And I go, dude, that's catering budget in Pirates of the Caribbean. Those are $300 million movies. We're not going to have lobster every day at lunch. We're going to have hot dogs, okay? But, we're going to make a good movie.
Was it hard for you, because you mentioned you started becoming more vocal, you got the walking papers from your manager. I would imagine it was tempting at some point to say, you know what, maybe I won't be so vocal about my faith or my political views. Maybe I will pull back. How did you make that decision to say, no, this is who I am, and I am going to be open, and I am going to talk about it?
Well, I think it made me more vocal, actually. So Facebook took me down a year and a half ago. I'm still on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, K-Sorbs. My buddies call me Sorbs, not Sorbo. But I decided, I'm a strong-willed kid, and that comes from my dad, the way he taught all 5 of us kids. You work hard, play hard. You don't expect handouts. You follow that dream, and you follow it with all your heart and soul. And my parents were very strong. My dad was the best man at my wedding, actually. They were a very big influence on me. So, I'm grateful for the road they've led not only me down, but my 4 siblings as well. So, I don't operate. In fact, I got a shirt right here. Look at that. Freedom over fear. All right. Freedom over fear.
Love it.
So I'm going to keep doing what I think the Lord has opened his door for me about 10, 11 years ago. And this is the road that I'm going down. And I tell people all the time, I think Jesus was the first original guy that took the road less traveled. And thank you, Mr. Frost, for writing that, because I've always loved that poem. And I tell people all the time, I know I'm walking that road. I know you guys are walking that road. And I tell people I'll make the road less traveled a superhighway. And that's what we got to do. Can't be afraid. We need people to wake up the sheep out there. We need lions to wake up too.
Yeah, that's a great message. Do the hard things. So,
yeah.
Kevin, you were talking about how busy you are, and you've got a lot of these projects and your company, you're working all this stuff. Like, before we run out of time, I want you to be able to mention some of the things you have going on that you'd love people to know about.
Well, first of all, Left Behind, go to leftbehindmovie.com. That's leftbehindmovie.com. It shows you the trailer. It shows you what theater's showing in your area. We got 1,500 screens, so please go check it out. And then I got the Reagan movie coming out. I heard late spring it's coming out. Dennis Quaid plays Reagan. I play his pastor. And then my other movie that I directed, Miracle in East Texas, True Story. Hopefully that's coming out late spring as well. And I got 5 other movies I shot last year that'll be out either late this year or early next year. And I've got 5 movies lined up for this year. In fact, I start shooting at the end of this month through February. I got two movies back-to-back filming there. So I like staying busy. SorboStudios.com is another place great to go. So I know I gave a mouthload out there, 3 different .com places, but I hope people check them out.
Yeah, you're not busy enough. Clearly, it's a real problem.
Yeah, I know.
Well, just as we kind of ride out to a close here, what would you say to those who maybe are a little fearful, right? They're hearing what you're saying, and they're like, man, I wish I was that open. I wish I was able to do that. And they're holding themselves back from speaking the truth, specifically when it comes to faith. What would you say to them?
Well, don't let anyone set your limitations, for one thing, especially yourself. I mean, I know that, there's a lot of failure in life, and you're going to fail in life over and over again. A lot of people are afraid of failure. Maybe they fail once, and then they start blaming God. They blame a God they don't believe in. They blame family, friends. And I always say, cue Michael Jackson. It's the man in the mirror. Look in the mirror. That's where the problem is. I mean, every time I got down, when I went through an illness back in 2007 where I suffered a series of strokes, took me 3 years to fully recover. If I got down, my wife would look at me, Sam, and she'd say, Kevin, it happened. What are you going to do about it? We all hit roadblocks in life. Everybody's got a story. You're not unique. We all are going to have rough roads. God never promised an easy life for any of us in this world. So you got to find a way to get past those failures and look at them as positives instead of negatives.
Excellent message. Great words there. Kevin Sorbo, hey, Really appreciate you stopping by for a few minutes. Appreciate your voice and all the work you're doing out there, and pointing people to God. Appreciate you.
Thank you. LeftBehindMovie.com. Happy New Year, everybody, and God bless.
All right, we're back here on this episode of Faith versus Culture on the CBN News Channel. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there. Just finished up speaking with actor Kevin Sorbo, and I guess I should say actor, producer, director, carrying a lot more hats these days. But a great conversation, really refreshing to see someone who's just bold and really kind of unwilling to waver on his faith and the message he's bringing.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you know that it's going to cost you money, right? I mean, let's look back at the fact he talked about losing the manager when he started getting more vocal on politics and faith, how he started to see that really impact his career. A lot of people would say, you know what? I'm not going to compromise that. I'm going to shut my mouth. I'm going to go back and I'm going to get those jobs. And he's chosen a very alternative path, and he's a hard worker, right? So he doesn't mind going out, raising money, doing things outside of the studio system in Hollywood. And so I kind of admire that. I think it's an interesting position to be in when you're faced with that choice and you make the choice he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And an interesting story, too, about him attending a Billy Graham event and actually speaking with Billy Graham at that event as he came down for essentially the altar call. And that's an interesting story that I was not aware of.
Well, and what a full circle moment, right? That he shares that story as an adult. So he's a kid when it happens. He shares it. And then Larry Ross, who was actually the publicist for Billy Graham for years, calls him and says, come and be a part of this book, that we're doing. I mean, that's pretty cool to just see how many people's lives and how many celebrities' lives. Kathy Lee Gifford is another one who Billy Graham, watching him on television or seeing a movie that changed her life. And so, yeah, I guess it speaks a lot to Billy Graham and his impact, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God using these people in great ways, and it's great to see it. And it's great to see Kevin doing the work that he's doing right now. So a fun conversation there. Appreciate him being here. Appreciate you all being here with us as well. We'll be back to wrap it up. The other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture. All right, that's all the time we have for this episode. As always, thanks so much for being here. We will pray for you as you go throughout your week. We hope it's a great one. God bless, and we will see you next time.